Hello, and welcome to WriterSpeak, a program dedicated to the written word and those who produce it. I'm your host, Jeane Slone. I distribute local authors' books, and I'm an author of 2 historical fictions, She Flew Bombers and She Built Ships. With me today in the studio is author Arletta Dawdy. Welcome, Arletta, to WriterSpeak.
Thank you, Jeannie. I'm really honored to be here.
Arletta Dawdy was a social worker for 40 years, and she has written 2 published books, Huachuca Woman and By Grace, and a third of this trilogy is in the works. Tell me, do these books have to be read in sequence, Arletta?
No, they are standalone novels. They're loosely connected by the Huachuca Mountains and also by the main character of Huachuca Woman, Joe, appears in each of the next 2 books in cameo performances.
That is a very interesting way to put it, that they are standalone.
Yes, you often see this in relation to mysteries. Not so much historical fiction, but that's how I designed it.
It makes it a little easier in a way.
Yes, it does, because I did extensive research on Huachuca Woman, and while the other 2 require additional research as far as the terrain and what goes on in the Huachucas and the fort that's near there remains very similar, and I can reuse it in a different way.
That's fascinating. Tell me, what inspired you to write about a woman born in the 1800s? And why did you choose the setting of Arizona?
Okay, I really enjoy the period of about 1880 to 1920, and that's when and where the books are set. My then teenage son and husband were headed to New Mexico one holiday season and stopped off in the southeast corner, Cochise County of Arizona. And my son and I both fell in love with Bisbee primarily and couldn't stop talking about it all through the family visits in New Mexico. And when we got to my sister-in-law and brother-in-law's home in the north, Richard, my brother-in-law, started throwing out one-liners about how his grandma Jo had lived in Ash Canyon in the Huachucas and also in Bisbee. And so at 3:30 in the morning or thereabouts, I'm madly writing down my version of who Josephine is. It's snowing outside. I don't have pen and paper inside. I go sorting, rambling through the house trying to find something, and finally find a little 2x3 tablet and a stub of a pencil. It was freezing cold, so I'm in the bathroom, if you will, wrapped up in towels, making these notes that later led to Huachuca Woman.
And so Joe was the person who told you a lot of the stories?
No, it was her grandson.
And what was his name
Richard.
again? Richard.
Right.
Well, has Richard gotten to read Huachuca Woman?
I saw him and his wife in October when I was in New Mexico, and she's been reading them to him. But now that it's on Kindle and he can access it, or I'm sorry, not Kindle, I handed them paper copies of both. My sister-in-law had it on Kindle, and he was delighted and seemed to be looking forward to it. And within the acknowledgments, I acknowledge his contribution. So
must be really fascinating for him to be able to read it from all his one-liners.
Right. He didn't know much more about the incidents than the one-liners. She met Geronimo, she met Pancho Villa, she had a child out of wedlock somewhere in California, on and on. So all of those things fed into the book, but they don't reflect on the family. This is not the actual Josephine, but I did keep the name.
I see. She is a pretty remarkable character, and I can see why you just wanted to make sure you got it down once you got it in your head, because she was a story waiting to happen, it seems.
It seems so.
Yeah.
And I'm the one to do it. So that was really exciting.
So I was wondering about, we've been mostly talking about Huachuca Woman. Tell me a little bit about By Grace.
By Grace starts out in Albany, New York, with an 18-year-old only child who is orphaned when her father dies. And he ran a mercantile down at the wharf. And so sailors were in and out of there a lot, as well as local folks who lived along that area of Albany. When he dies, they have made plans. They've cooked the books so that she has cash. And the bankers have come and she's turned over everything to them. And she heads out down the Hudson to New York City. And that's the beginning of her geological and psychological journey.
I just can't help noticing that amazing necklace that you're wearing. I think it must match the necklace in the book By Grace.
Absolutely. My cover designer, Kent Sorensen, was able to incorporate it. And it comes from the western side of the Huachucas. There's a shop, or it's out of business now, but the Blue Opal Gallery that we discovered on our second visit down there and returned to any number of times. And this is Blue Opal, as are my earrings.
Oh.
But this, the roughness of it, and having it have two surfaces are quite beautiful. And then the design work for this, the wrapping, was done by Mary Stella and Jan, who belong to Redwood Writers too. So it's, in many ways, this book is a Redwood Writers product.
And so you had the necklace before the book?
No, I got the necklace in 2008, and the book was pretty well written at that point. It was still going through some editing and critiquing, but no, I saw this. I didn't anticipate making it a necklace. I thought it'd be too heavy, but in fact, it's quite comfortable.
Yeah, it does look heavy, but it's so beautiful and unique. I think people just are drawn to the uniqueness of it.
Well, I met the owner of the property. I had never met her in all my visits to the gallery. I only met her partner, but in October, I did meet her. Her name is Sharon, and had a lovely visit and hope to see her again when I go down to Arizona at the end of February.
I was curious as to whether you have a name for your third book in the trilogy.
Yes, I do.
Oh.
It is Rose of Sharon.
Oh.
And it has paranormal elements in it. She's the one who most remains in the Huachucas. She doesn't venture out until the end of the book. She seldom has left that area, and then only to go across the valley to Bisbee or Tombstone or up to Sierra Vista.
And how is your book coming along, The Rose of Sharon?
Well, it has some renewed energy coming to it after being on hiatus for 2 years while I was getting these published and critiqued. And it went dry for a while. And now it's seeping up a little bit. But I'm really hoping that when I get down in the area, it will truly come together.
You seem to travel out west to Arizona, and is that where you do most of your writing then?
I do my writing where and whenever I am. But after I retired from social work, Child Protective Services in this county, I traveled with my husband in our truck and fifth wheel all over the West and actually back east as well. And we always felt so blessed and so relieved to come back. And once you got to the Rockies, we knew we were home. So we also explored the Northwest and Wyoming, Colorado, it's Idaho, what have you. But Arizona is where Josephine happened, and it was fascinating. We'd go back there and stay for several months at a time.
I know that you regularly attend the Women Writing the West conference.
Yes.
In Albuquerque, and has that enhanced your writing?
I've belonged to Women Writing the West for nearly 12 years, and I didn't join until I had completed the Huachuca Woman manuscript, thinking that I had to have something in hand, and I should have joined much earlier. I was referred to it by Joanne Levy, who wrote a number of books about women in the gold rush here in California. And it's turned out to be an incredibly supportive group. You can, on our listserv, raise a question, whether it's about publishing or a technicality. What were the petticoats like in 1870, or what was used for not getting pregnant, or what were the teas that might have healed, all this kind of stuff, and you'll get responses back from the group. And the membership spreads across this country into Canada, and I think we have a member in Australia. So it's wide-ranging.
Sounds like a great network.
It is.
Yeah.
And I do belong to two other organizations, the Historical Novel Society, which you might want to look into, and we have a Northern California chapter that meets quarterly, and then they have their conferences 1 year in England and 1 year in the US. And in June, it'll be in St. Petersburg, Florida. And then I also was am a member of the Squaw Valley Community of Writers, where I presented parts of Huachuca Woman back in the late 90s.
I think it really helps to belong to a lot of different organizations for information and support.
Yes.
Really.
I agree, but I think that Redwood Writers has been the most important to me because it's here, it's local, has multiple events, readings, and contests, and conferences, and a listserv again where you can announce, your good news, or you can raise questions.
Yeah.
But it's not just about a single area. People write all kinds of things, as they do for the other organizations, but most specifically, probably novel writers and poetry folks dominate.
Redwood Writers is amazing that there's 250 members,
Exactly.
The biggest club in all of California.
I know, and what roots it has, going back to Ina Coolbrith and Jack London, and so many incredible writers at the turn of the century.
I loved on your blog that you wrote, we're told as writers that we should write what we know about. And you wrote in your blog, I don't like to write about what I know about.
That was me alluding to Child Protective Services, because there's too much heaviness and sadness and difficulty in dealing with that in real life. But from that work and some previous work in settlement houses in San Francisco and other positions, and with a master's degree in social welfare, I felt blessed to have that background to incorporate so that alcoholism is addressed in Huachuca Woman.
So you are using it a little bit.
And the family dynamics as well, as to how people respond to one another and the currents that flow through a family. In both, I deal with racism and prejudice to different groups, strongly on the Chinese here, Mexican American, Latino culture in Huachuca Woman, and that comes out of a strong background of belief in civil rights, what have you.
I understand what you mean about I don't like to write about what I know about. I think what you mean by that is I like to write for escape. I want to escape into a new world. I want to research information I don't know about.
And that's very much what I've done.
You definitely have. Yeah.
And it's an incredible world. I initially know where it's going to be, and I have an idea about each of the 3 characters along the way, but I will modify it. For instance, I thought this book would be about a painter, an artist who comes west and falls in love, a la Georgia O'Keeffe, or Emily Carr up in Canada, or Frida Kahlo out of Mexico. And they would be immersed in women's work, women's life, and that's what this character would would paint. And instead, Maggie O'Brien from Pennsylvania by way of Ireland shows up in Machuca Woman. And so I had to come up with a different concept. I still wanted some kind of artist, and it turned out that Grace became a jewelry designer studying with Tiffany.
It's funny how the twists and turns go.
Yes.
You know, when you first start writing, you think it's going to go this way, and then it doesn't.
No. Well, see, place is a character for me. And that's, in this book, it's many different places because she travels across country, disguising herself, her appearance, changing her name, until she gets down to the Huachucas. And it was important to have an understanding of how she became a jewelry designer, and that's where I have her mentor connect her with the Tiffany studio. But the characters have a way of saying, I don't want to go there, I want to go there, and I'm going, you better come along, writer. So there's a magic sometimes as the characters evolve that I don't always have planned out. So to some extent, I'm a pantser rather than a person who does an elaborate profile ahead of time of the book.
I found your blog to be a wonderful place to visit, to learn and discover the backstories of your books. I also, it was the first blog I had read that you would ask questions
at the end
to people.
Yes.
And you got a variety of answers from people all over the place.
Yes, that's true. And it's fun because it can help give them a focus for their commentary of, you know, how did something similar happen to you, or do you do this or that? And it's worked quite well overall.
How often do you blog, and how do you find it benefits your writing?
I don't blog often enough. I started in 2010 and was more attentive at that time. I'm working on a chain blog right now where I'm trying to talk about Rose of Sharon. So it's irregular, and recently, like the last year, it's been like only once every 3 months, and that's deadly. You really need to blog once a week. And so I'm hoping that once I get this blog ready, then I'll zoom ahead. And I will probably write about my sojourn into Arizona that's coming up.
Yeah, tell us about going to Arizona.
This is going to be really special. A friend and I are driving down, and she'll stay for however long and then fly home. She won't stay the whole time. And I'll get to take her around to places that I haven't been to, like the John Slaughter Ranch, which is a famous, maybe infamous historical landmark down there. And I will be staying, or we will be staying, in one of the canyons. We'll be staying in Ramsey Canyon, which I've always wanted to do, but hadn't been able to do previously.
Where do you stay?
There's a place called the Ramsey Canyon Cabins. They have just 2 little cabins there.
Wow.
And it's right next door to the Arizona Folklore Preserve, where every weekend they bring in cowboy musicians. And I got to go to one of those in October and loved it. And I'll just walk across the path and get there pretty often, I think, on this trip. And then at the base of the canyon, not the base, what do I want to say? You go deeper into the canyon and come to the Ramsey Canyon Nature Conservancy Hummingbird Preserve. And I've been there a number of times. This time I'm hoping that by exercising more, I'll be able to adventure further into that very, very special place where the hummingbirds come up from Mexico, 16 different varieties, maybe 18. And they come up in the summer months.
So are you envisioning that you're going to be incorporating this trip into your third book?
Not quite incorporating it, but I will blog about the trip. Mm-hmm. But for the book, I'm looking for inspiration. And yes, perhaps clarification on some of the settings that I've already identified, like early in the book, there's a situation where Rose and her brother escaped to a cave. They're only 8 years old, and it's up in the cliffs, and it's where they're supposed to go anytime strangers come to the ranch.
Oh.
And they witness the killing of their parents and the handyman, and the story kind of begins right there. So if I can find a cave, that would be wonderful to fulfill my already projected image of it.
That's not going to be very easy to write about.
No. Well, I've already killed the parents off. I've gotten them.
Are you supposed to tell us this?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
This part of it is okay.
You're not. It doesn't. No, it's not going to ruin it.
This is the first chapter right now, and it started life as a short story, and the more I thought about it, the more I knew I wanted to go further with these twins and with Blake Harris, the cowboy who they find out in the desert floor as they're trying to make their way to Tombstone. And he takes them under wing eventually. And there's a whole lot that goes on after that.
So, how long did it take you to produce Huachuca Woman?
Well, I probably spent, because I was still working, and that was hard.
Yeah.
CPS is a very draining job of your emotions and energy. So I was writing on weekends, and it probably took me a good 10 years to get a completed first draft, and that included a lot of research, extensive research. Then on into the 2000s, I was still reworking it for quite a little while and spending time down in that area. But I had started the second book before actually completing Huachuca Woman. I'd gotten a head start on it, but was still toning up and submitting to agent after agent after agent. And in October of 2011, I was at a conference where you submitted the first page of a book, and the reader would select 4 or 5 of them to read to a panel that included 3 people who didn't deal with historical fiction or adult fiction. And I should say, my first page of Huachuca Woman was read to accolades. I had already interviewed with the agent on the other side of the podium who was interested in adult fiction and wanted to see 50 pages of Huachuca Woman before this first page was read aloud. And then there was a filmmaker and a audio person on the panel who also were very enthusiastic. Next step was submission to the agent and then waiting for a response. And it was a familiar response, just not right for our agency. But she had wanted hard copy. And so I had mailed her the 50 pages, and they came back to me along with this cover letter rejecting me. And buried in the manuscript portion was a checklist and a commentary from her reader. She did not actually read the book, didn't have the background of having heard the first page. And this person jumped in, not at the beginning of the 50 pages, but just read something like 10 pages, maybe pages 20 to 30, I don't recall exactly. And she didn't like the character. She couldn't identify with her. So that was my last pitch. I was done finally. My daughter had been encouraging me to self-publish and helped me to do that. And so that's when last year I turned to Blake Webster, a local person who does a lot of web work and designing books for Amazon and Kindle, and that's where I went.
Yeah, what a journey. It's interesting with agents because it's really just one person's opinion.
That's right. And I decided she was 22 years old, had no life experience, and didn't understand the West. I don't know if any of that is correct, but that's what I had to do to be rid of her input. It's not been the kind of response that I've gotten.
So did you find it was a little faster to be able to produce by Grace?
Yes, it moved much more swiftly, and it's a real excitement and honor that I feel to have these books out in the public. And they have been so good to me with their reviews. It's just been good news most of the way.
They are very well received.
Thank you.
A lot of people are reading them, and the cover design's wonderful. The title's wonderful. You know, unfortunately, that is everything, is title and cover.
Well, and I took a chance with Huachuca Woman, because your workshops will tell you, oh, don't have an unpronounceable name on your, as your title.
Yeah.
And I had a hard enough time learning to say it right. It reminded me of when my parents came west and referred to Sepulveda Boulevard as Sepulveda, and had a few more charmers like that. So I stumbled over Huachuca Woman. And in the first pages of the book, I show people how to pronounce it, acknowledging that I wasn't supposed to use this, but I had to.
I think when people see a word they can't pronounce, they just settle on it, and like when I first saw it, I thought, oh, this is Oaxaca.
Right.
But it's not. So it just doesn't matter. In your mind, you're using your own word, and it doesn't, it's still a good book anyway. I wanted to know, where can we buy your books?
Oh, well, you can go to Amazon and buy either the paper copy or the Kindle copy. But locally, you can go to Lulu's out by G&G Market in Santa Rosa, and they're carrying it. There are other shops that will carry it for a period of time as my guide will move them around the county to 16 or 18 different sites.
Oh, good.
So you're liable to trip across them in your favorite coffee shop.
Good, that's nice to know. I wanted to thank you, Arletta Dawdy, for visiting us on WriterSpeak with your two books, Huachuca Woman and By Grace. And thank you for joining us on WriterSpeak.
And thank you for having me.